Deep in the forest, on a hill where the fog never truly lifted, stood an old bungalow. The villagers below never spoke of it after dark. They said the trees around it grew crooked because the soil itself was afraid. They said no bird ever nested on its roof. And they said that decades ago, a bride had gone in through its wooden doors and never came out. But Ahmed and Sana did not know this. They only knew that the bungalow was cheap, beautiful in photographs, and far away from the noise of the city. The perfect place for two newlyweds to spend their first night together as husband and wife. The wedding had been 3 days ago. Flowers were still fading in Sana's hair when she and Ahmed packed their small car and drove out of the city, laughing at every pothole, holding hands at every red light. Ahmed had found the bungalow online, an old colonial-style house on a hill, surrounded by pine forest, with a caretaker who lived in the village below and only came up if called. "It looks a little spooky," Sana said, scrolling through the photos on her phone, half joking. "That's the charm of it," Ahmed said, grinning. "Old houses have character. Besides, it's just one night. Tomorrow we'll be at the hill station, in a proper hotel with room service and hot water." The road began to climb an hour before sunset. The city fell behind them, then the small towns, then even the tea stalls disappeared. What remained was forest. Tall pine trees leaning over the road like old men bowing to something unseen, and a mist that thickened with every mile. By the time they reached the narrow dirt path leading up to the bungalow, the sun had already dipped behind the hills, and the sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise, purple, then gray, then black. "There it is," Ahmed said, pointing. Through the trees, the bungalow appeared, a large, two-story house with a sloping roof, wide wooden verandas, and tall windows that reflected the last of the daylight like dark, watching eyes. It was beautiful in the way old, forgotten things are beautiful, and it was silent in a way that made Sana's skin prickle, though she said nothing. The caretaker, an old man named Rashid, was waiting at the gate with a single kerosene lamp, even though he had a torch clipped to his belt. "You are staying the night?" he asked, not quite looking at either of them. "Yes, Chacha," Ahmed said cheerfully. "Just tonight. We leave first thing in the morning." Rashid's eyes moved slowly to Sana. He looked at her for a long moment. Too long, and something in his expression flickered, like a man recognizing an old photograph. "Keep the lamps burning," he said quietly. "All of them. All night. Do not open the windows after dark. And Beta," he looked at Sana again, "do not let your hair down inside this house." Sana laughed nervously. "Why not?" Rashid did not answer. He simply handed Ahmed the keys, gave a small bow, and walked back down the hill without another word, his lamp bobbing like a firefly until it disappeared into the trees. "Well," Ahmed said, trying to sound light, "he's certainly cheerful." "Village superstitions," Sana said, though her voice was smaller than before. "My grandmother used to say things like that too." They carried their bags inside. The house inside, the bungalow, was grander than the photographs had shown. A wide staircase curved up from the entrance hall, its wooden banister carved with vines and flowers, though many of the flowers looked strangely like faces if you looked too closely. Old paintings hung on the walls, their subjects unrecognizable beneath decades of dust. But Sana noticed that in almost every one, there was a woman. Always a woman, always in the corner of the frame, always looking outward, as if she were looking at whoever stood in the hall. "This place is beautiful," Ahmed said, running his hand along the banister. "Imagine what parties they must have had here." "It's beautiful," Sana agreed, "but it's also heavy. Do you feel that?" "Heavy." "Like the air itself is thick. Like something is listening." Ahmed laughed and pulled her close. "That's just the mountain air, Jan. And maybe a little bit of wedding night nerves." They found their room on the upper floor, a large bedroom with a four-poster bed, faded velvet curtains, and a tall mirror in the corner that had gone cloudy with age. Ahmed lit the lamps Rashid had left for them, filling the room with a warm, flickering light that pushed the shadows into the corners but never quite banished them. Dinner was simple. Food they had packed from the city, eaten by lamplight on a small table by the window. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Somewhere far off, an owl called once and did not call again. It was around midnight that the first strange thing happened. Sana had gone to change, and as she pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall loose down her back, Rashid's warning already forgotten, the temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that she saw her own breath mist in the air. "Ahmed," she called. "Did you open a window?" "No," he said, sitting up on the bed. "Everything's shut." The lamp on the dressing table flickered, once, twice, and then steadied. But the flame had turned an odd shade of blue for just a moment, like the flick of a snake's tongue. Sana turned to look at herself in the old mirror. For one heartbeat, no more than that, she saw a second reflection standing just behind her own. Tall, broad-shouldered. Its eyes were the wrong color, gleaming amber in the lamplight, and it was smiling in a way that human mouths should not smile, too wide, too knowing. She spun around. The room was empty. "What is it?" Ahmed asked, alarmed by her face. "Nothing," Sana whispered, though her heart was hammering. "I thought I saw something." "It's nothing. Just tired, I think." Ahmed held her close, and after a while, her heartbeat slowed, and they told each other it was nothing, only shadows and an unfamiliar room playing tricks on tired eyes. They blew out all but one lamp, and they slept. But something in the house was already awake. The watcher he had been waiting a very long time. His name, the name he had once had, back when he still wore a name the way men do, had been forgotten even by himself, worn away like a stone in a river after centuries of solitude. Now he was simply what the villagers called him in hushed voices, the Jinn of the Hill Bungalow. Some called him worse things. Some did not call him anything at all, afraid that naming him would summon him. He had lived in the walls and shadows of this house since before it was a house, since it was only a clearing on the hill where a great fire had once burned, and he had made his home in the space between smoke and dark. When men built their bungalow over his clearing, he did not leave. He simply moved into the spaces they left empty. Behind mirrors, beneath floorboards, inside the hollow hush of midnight. For 100 years, he had watched brides come through these doors. Young women in red and gold, laughing, unaware, their husbands beside them, believing the night held nothing but each other. He had loved before. If what he felt could be called love, and not merely a hunger so old it had learned to wear love's shape. Bloody roses. Skin like moonlight. Laughter like small bells. He remembered them all, every bride who had ever slept beneath this roof, and he remembered, too, what became of them. But none of them, not one, in 100 years, had been as beautiful as this one. Sana. He had watched her step out of the car in the fading light, watched the way the mist curled toward her as though it, too, recognized something rare. He had watched her hair fall loose in front of the mirror, black and shining, and something inside him, something that had been asleep, patient, waiting, had opened its eyes. He wanted her. Not merely her body, though the desire for that burned in him too, old and animal. He wanted her presence, her voice, her breath in his ear at midnight. The warmth she carried the way only living things could carry warmth. He wanted to keep her the way a man keeps a flame in a lamp, sheltered, contained, forever burning only for him. And he had 100 years of patience, and 100 tricks, and this was only the first night. Part 4, the first hours. Sana woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of someone whispering her name. It was so soft, so close, that for a moment she thought it was Ahmed, and she reached for him without opening her eyes. But her hand found only the empty warmth of the sheet beside her. Ahmed. No answer. She sat up. The single lamp still burned on the table, its flame low and steady, casting long shadows across the room. The bed beside her was empty, the blanket thrown back as though he had simply gotten up. Ahmed, she said again, louder this time. The bathroom door was ajar. No light came from within. Ahmed, this isn't funny. She rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and crossed the cold floor. The old floorboards groaned beneath her feet, and somewhere in the walls, she heard a soft sound, almost like breathing, almost like a low chuckle, gone before she could be certain she had heard it at all. She pushed open the bathroom door. Empty. Panic began to rise in her chest, quick and sharp. She hurried to the bedroom door and opened it onto the long, dark corridor. The paintings on the walls seemed different in the dark. The women in the corners of the frames seemed to have turned their heads, just slightly, to watch her pass. Ahmed. Here. His voice came from below, from the staircase, and relief flooded through her so fast her knees nearly buckled. She hurried down, gripping the carved banister. Ahmed stood in the entrance hall, in the dark, looking up at her with an odd, still expression. "What are you doing down here?" she asked, breathless. "You scared me." "I heard something," he said slowly. "A voice. It called me down. I thought it was you." They stared at each other in the dark hallway, and for the first time, both of them understood, without saying it aloud, that they were not alone in the house. "Let's just get through the night," Ahmed said, taking her hand. His fingers were cold, colder than they should have been. "We'll leave the moment the sun rises. I promise." They returned to their room. Ahmed lit every lamp he could find, filling the room with light until the shadows had nowhere left to hide, and they sat together on the bed, backs against the headboard, waiting for the dark hours to pass. But the jinn was patient. He had all night. He had, if it came to it, all of forever. The voice in the walls, it began with whispers. At first, they told themselves it was the wind, the pines outside sighing against the windows, the old house settling on its foundations. But the whispers grew clearer and clearer until they could make out words, and the words were always the same. "Sana, Sana, come. Sana, my bride." Ahmed's grip on her hand tightened. "Do you hear that?" "I hear it," she whispered back, her voice shaking. "It knows my name." The lamp flames bent sideways, as if a wind had passed through the sealed room, though nothing stirred the curtains. In the tall mirror across the room, the reflection of the bed seemed, for just a moment, to hold 3 people instead of 2. A third shape standing at the foot of the bed, tall, patient, its eyes glowing faintly amber in the dark glass. Sana screamed and buried her face in Ahmed's shoulder. When he looked again, the mirror held only their own reflection, pale and frightened in the lamplight. "We need to leave," Ahmed said, his voice tight with fear he was trying very hard to hide. "Now. Forget the morning. We're leaving now." They dressed quickly, hands trembling, and hurried for the door. But the door, which had opened easily hours before, would not budge. Ahmed threw his shoulder against it once, twice, 3 times, and it held as firmly as stone. A low laugh rolled through the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like dry leaves and old bones. "You are guests in my house," said a voice, deep, resonant, terrible in its calm. "You may not leave before I permit it." Ahmed turned, placing himself between Sana and the empty room, though there was nothing visible to fight. "Show yourself," he said, his voice cracking despite his effort to sound brave. "Leave her alone. Whatever you want, take it from me instead." The laugh came again, closer now, almost affectionate. "Foolish boy. I do not want you. I have watched 100 years for a bride such as this one. Her beauty is a candle, and I am a moth who has waited a century in the dark for a flame worth burning for." The shadows in the corner of the room folded inward, thickened, took shape, and for the first time, the jinn allowed himself to be seen. He was tall, too tall for the ceiling, and yet somehow he fit within the room, as though the space itself bent to accommodate him. His form was that of a man, broad and dark, but his eyes burned amber like twin coals, and his feet, Sana noticed with a fresh wave of terror, did not quite touch the floor. His shadow moved independently of him, twisting against the wall like something alive and hungry on its own. "Please," Sana whispered, tears streaking her face. "Please, we mean you no harm. Let us go home." The jinn's burning eyes turned to her, and his terrible expression softened into something almost gentle. a gentleness far more frightening than his rage would have been. "Home," he said softly. "This is a home too, little bride. A home older than the one you know. Stay. Let your husband go in peace, and stay with me, and I will give you a life beyond anything the world of men could offer. Palaces of smoke and starlight. Nights that never end. I will keep you safer, and love you more fiercely than any mortal man ever could." "Never," Ahmed said, stepping forward despite his shaking hands. "She is my wife. She is not yours to keep." The jinn's gentle expression vanished like a snuffed candle. "Then you will watch," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that shook the window panes, "as I take what I have waited a century to claim." The long night, what followed, was a night neither of them would ever fully describe to another living soul, not even to each other. The lamps in the room guttered and went out one by one, plunging them into a darkness broken only by the amber glow of the jinn's eyes and the pale silver light that seemed to bleed from Sana's own trembling hands as fear turned her knuckles white around Ahmed's arm. The house came alive around them. Doors that had been locked swung open on their own, revealing corridors that had not existed in the daylight house they had walked through hours before. Corridors that stretched impossibly long, lined with more paintings of more brides, their painted eyes following the couple as they were driven, step by step, deeper into rooms they did not recognize. "Run if you like," the jinn's voice echoed from everywhere. "This house is mine. Every wall, every shadow, every door. You will only ever find your way back to me." They ran anyway, because what else can frightened, mortal hearts do but run? Down corridors that twisted like snakes, past mirrors that showed rooms behind them that did not exist, past windows that looked out not on the forest, but on swirling smoke and distant, cold stars that belonged to no earthly sky. At one point, Sana turned a corner and lost sight of Ahmed entirely. She called his name until her voice broke, and the house answered her only in the jinn's low, patient laughter, layered now with something that might have been dozens of voices. The echoes, perhaps, of every bride who had ever been lost within these walls. "Ahmed," she screamed, pounding on a locked door. "Ahmed, please." "He cannot hear you," the jinn whispered, suddenly beside her though she had not seen him arrive. "He is elsewhere in my house now. Alone, as you are. As you always would have been, eventually, my bride. Mortal husbands grow old. Mortal love grows tired. I do not." Sana turned to face him, and though every instinct told her to run, something in her, the same steel that had made her family proud, the same steel that had made her say yes to a future with a man she loved despite every uncertainty, made her stand her ground instead. "You don't want me," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You want what I remind you of. Every bride who ever walked through that door was never truly yours. You've been alone so long you've mistaken hunger for love. That isn't love. That's just an old, empty thing, wearing love's face because it's forgotten what real warmth feels like." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across the jinn's terrible, ancient features. Something almost like pain. "You know nothing of what I have lost," he said, quieter now. "Maybe not," Sana said, "but I know this. I will not become one more painting on your wall. I would rather die tonight, fighting to get back to my husband, than live forever as a ghost in your house of smoke." The jinn's eyes flared, amber turning to red, and for a terrible instant Sana believed those words would be the last she ever spoke. But then, from somewhere below, came Ahmed's voice, ragged and desperate, calling her name, and something in the sound of it, raw, human, real, seemed to crack something in the ancient silence of the house. What Rashid knew far below, in the village, old Rashid sat awake by his own small fire, as he had sat awake on countless nights before, ever since the night, 60 years ago now, when he himself had been a young groom, and had climbed that same hill with his own bride, and had come down again alone. He had heard, on the wind, the particular silence that fell over the mountain when the jinn of the bungalow had chosen his next bride, and he knew, with the certainty of a man who had lived his whole life in the shadow of that hill, that tonight was such a night. He rose from his fire, took down an old iron key from where it hung above his door, a key that had never once been used to open any lock in his house, and an old cloth bundle he had kept, unopened, for 60 years. Inside it, wrapped carefully, was a verse written by a per long dead, ink faded but still legible, and a small vial of water blessed at a shrine 3 villages away, meant for exactly this purpose, kept ready every single year in case any fool ever again dared spend the night in that cursed house. Not this time, the old man muttered to himself, lighting a fresh lamp and beginning the long climb up the hill in the dark. Not this bride. The breaking. Ahmed had found his way, through corridors that bent and twisted like nightmares, back to the entrance hall. And there, pressed against the great locked door, he beat his fists bloody against the ancient wood and screamed his wife's name into a house that answered only in laughter. And then, through the small glass pane beside the door, he saw a light climbing the dark hill outside. A single lamp, swaying, growing closer. Rashid! Ahmed shouted, hope surging fierce and sudden in his chest. Chacha, help us, please. The old man's voice came muffled through the heavy door. Stand back, Beta. Stand back from the door. Ahmed stumbled back. There came the sound of old words, spoken low and steady, a rhythm that seemed to make the very air of the hallway shudder. Verses older than the house itself, older even, perhaps, than the fire that had once burned in the clearing before any house stood there at all. Upstairs, in the room where the jinn stood close enough to Sana that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from him like frost from a winter window, the whole house suddenly trembled, as if some great fist had struck its foundations. The jinn's head snapped toward the sound, his burning eyes narrowing. No, he hissed. Not this. Not again. What's happening? Sana gasped, backing away as the walls groaned and the paintings on the corridor beyond rattled in their frames. Someone remembers, the jinn said bitterly, and for the first time, real fear, old, ancient fear, crossed his terrible face. Someone remembers the old words. The verses continued from below, rising now, insistent, and with each repeated line, the shadows in the room seemed to shrink back from the lamplight that flickered stubbornly back to life around them. The jinn's form began to waver, like smoke caught suddenly in a strong wind, no longer solid, no longer certain. Please, Sana said, seizing the moment, seizing whatever courage remained in her trembling body. Let me go. Whatever you were before you were this, whatever love you once knew before all this hunger, let it remember what it feels like to let something go, instead of holding on until it breaks. The jinn looked at her for a long, long moment, his amber eyes flickering between fury and something achingly close to sorrow. 100 years, he whispered, so soft it was barely sound at all. 100 years I have waited for warmth in this cold house, and warmth always leaves in the end. Always. Then let it leave gently, Sana said. This once. Let it leave gently. Downstairs, Rashid's voice reached its final verse, and the old iron key in his weathered hand began to glow faint silver in the dark. The great door shuddered once, and then, impossibly, swung open on its own, letting in the grey light of a sky just beginning, at last, to turn toward dawn. Upstairs, the jinn's form dissolved into smoke, thin as breath on a winter morning, and in the last instant before he vanished entirely back into the walls that had held him for 100 years, Sana heard his voice one final time. Not a threat now, but something almost like a farewell. Go, little bride. Go, and do not come back to this hill. I release you, this once, and never again. Sunrise, the lamps in the room burned steady and warm, the shadows retreating into ordinary corners the way shadows do in ordinary houses. Sana ran from the room, down the now familiar staircase, and into Ahmed's arms at the bottom, both of them shaking, both of them alive, both of them together. Rashid stood in the open doorway, his old lamp finally guttering out as the first true light of morning spilled across the hill. Come, he said simply. The sun is rising. His hour is done, for now. They did not need to be told twice. They gathered what little they could carry and left the rest behind, walking down the hill together as the mist began, at last, to lift from the pines, and somewhere behind them, the old bungalow stood silent once more in the growing light, waiting, as it had waited for 100 years before, for whatever bride the future might, someday, bring up that long and lonely road. But that bride, Rashid told them firmly as he walked them down to their car, would not be soon. He would see to that himself, he said, as he had seen to it for 60 quiet years already. Ahmed and Sana never returned to the hill. They built their life together far from any forest, any old house, any mountain road that climbed too high and too dark. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind moved a certain way against the windows, Sana would find herself remembering amber eyes in an old cloudy mirror, and a voice, ancient and lonely, that had, in the end, chosen to let her go.